In a quiet suburban neighborhood, life moved at its own gentle pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, flower beds bursting in vibrant colors, and driveways housing cars that gleamed under the morning sun. It was the kind of place where people waved hello as they passed each other. Kids rode their bikes down empty cul-de-sacs, and weekends were filled with backyard barbecues. But beneath this idyllic surface lay a simmering tension, one fueled by Karen Hargrove. Karen was not your average neighbor. She wasn't just part of the Homeowners Association, HOA. She was the HOA. Elected years ago during a sparsely attended meeting, Karen had since appointed herself Queen Bee of the community. Her reign was marked by strict enforcement of rules no one else seemed to care about quite as much. From lawn height regulations to mailbox color codes, Karen's watchful eye missed nothing. And if you dared to step out of line, well, let's just say Karen didn't take kindly to rule breakers. At first, most residents found her enthusiasm amusing. "Oh, that's just Karen," they'd chuckle, after receiving yet another strongly worded letter about leaving trash bins visible on non-collection days. But over time, her antics grew tiresome. Complaints about misplaced garden gnomes turned into demands for fines. Disagreements over holiday decorations escalated into full-blown arguments. Slowly but surely, Karen transformed what should have been a harmonious neighborhood into a battleground of bureaucracy. Enter Michael Reynolds. Michael was new to the area, having moved in 6 months earlier with his wife and 2 teenage kids. He kept mostly to himself, focusing on settling into his new home and enjoying some well-deserved downtime. As the recently appointed chief of the FBI, Michael had spent decades navigating high-stakes situations, but now he wanted peace, a chance to recharge before diving back into the chaos of his job. Little did he know, trouble would find him anyway. Michael's house sat near the end of the street, tucked away behind tall hedges and shaded by towering oak trees. It was modest but cozy, with a welcoming front porch and a freshly painted white fence. Everything about it screamed normalcy, that is, until Karen noticed something amiss. One day, while taking her daily power walk through the neighborhood, Karen spotted Michael's mailbox. It jutted out ever so slightly beyond the property line, encroaching onto the sidewalk by mere inches. To anyone else, it might have gone unnoticed, but to Karen it was an unforgivable offense. She marched up to Michael's door later that afternoon, clipboard in hand, and indignation etched across her face. "Good afternoon," she began curtly, barely waiting for Michael to open the door fully. "I need to discuss a serious matter regarding your mailbox." Michael blinked, caught off guard. "My mailbox?" "Yes," Karen snapped, pointing dramatically toward the offending object. "It's violating Section 3.2 of our HOA guidelines. Mailboxes must align perfectly with the curb. Yours does not." Michael glanced at the mailbox, then back at Karen. "Oh, I hadn't realized." "Well, now you do," Karen replied sharply. "You'll need to fix it immediately, otherwise further action will be taken." Michael nodded politely, though inwardly he couldn't help but marvel at how seriously Karen took such trivial matters. "Sure thing," he said. "I'll get right on it." But fixing the mailbox wasn't exactly at the top of Michael's priority list. Between unpacking boxes, helping his kids adjust to a new school, and spending quality time with his family, the task slipped his mind entirely. Days turned into weeks, and still, the mailbox remained unchanged. Karen, however, did not forget. Each time she walked past Michael's house, her irritation grew. How dare he ignore her directive? Didn't he understand the importance of maintaining order in the neighborhood? By the 3rd week, Karen had reached her breaking point. Enough was enough. If Michael wouldn't comply voluntarily, she'd make him comply by any means necessary. What Karen failed to realize, however, was that Michael wasn't just any ordinary homeowner. Beneath his calm exterior lay years of experience handling criminals, solving complex cases, and navigating dangerous situations. While Karen plotted her next move, Michael remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. After all, who could possibly imagine that a simple mailbox dispute would lead to anything more than a minor inconvenience? Frustrated and determined to assert her authority, Karen decided it was time to escalate things. She couldn't allow Michael, or anyone else, to flout the rules without consequences. Pacing back and forth in her living room, she mulled over her options. A formal warning hadn't worked. Polite reminders had fallen on deaf ears. Clearly, stronger measures were needed. That's when inspiration struck. Why not call in reinforcements? Karen had heard whispers about certain private security firms that specialized in enforcing HOA regulations. They weren't real police officers, of course, but they carried themselves with enough bravado to pass as legitimate authorities, at least to the untrained eye. Perfect, Karen thought. These men would teach Michael a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. After a quick internet search, Karen dialed the number of one such company. Within hours, she arranged a meeting with two representatives, Greg and Dave, both of whom looked like they belonged in a discount detective agency rather than patrolling suburban neighborhoods. Dressed in ill-fitting uniforms and sporting badges, purchased online, the duo exuded an air of misplaced confidence. Karen greeted them enthusiastically, eager to explain her plan. "I need you to issue a citation to my neighbor," Karen instructed, handing them a printed copy of the HOA guidelines. "His mailbox is violating Section 3.2. Make sure he understands the seriousness of the situation. Tell him he has 24 hours to fix it or face arrest." Greg and Dave exchanged skeptical glances. Arrest? For a mailbox? This woman was either delusional or incredibly passionate about her cause. Either way, they weren't about to argue. After all, this gig paid better than parking lot duty. The following afternoon, Greg and Dave arrived at Michael's house, armed with clipboards, official-looking documents, and a rehearsed script. Their mission was simple: intimidate Michael into compliance. What they didn't anticipate, however, was the man waiting inside. When Michael answered the door, he was greeted by the sight of two stern-faced individuals claiming to represent the HOA police. At first, he assumed it was some sort of prank. Neighbors had warned him about Karen's antics, but hiring fake cops? That seemed extreme even for her. "Sir, we're here regarding a violation of HOA guidelines," Greggy announced, trying to sound authoritative. "Your mailbox is encroaching on public property. You've been issued a citation and must rectify the issue within 24 hours or face legal action." Michael raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Legal action? For my mailbox?" "That's correct," Dave chimed in, clutching his clipboard tightly. "Failure to comply may result in arrest." At this point, Michael couldn't help but laugh. Arrest? Really? Still, he played along, asking to see their credentials. When they hesitated, he pressed further, requesting details about their employer and jurisdiction. It didn't take long for cracks to appear in their facade. Their badges were cheap imitations, and their answers grew increasingly vague. Finally, Michael decided to drop the bombshell. With a sly smile, he introduced himself, not as a homeowner, but as the newly appointed chief of the FBI. The color drained from Greg and Dave's faces as realization dawned. They weren't dealing with some ordinary guy. They were standing in front of one of the highest-ranking law enforcement officials in the country. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, stammering apologies, Greg and Dave beat a hasty retreat, leaving Michael shaking his head in disbelief. Back in her house, Karen remained oblivious to the disaster unfolding in her name. Convinced her plan was foolproof, she eagerly awaited news of Michael's submission. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a far bigger mess, one that would ultimately expose her own misdeeds and leave her reputation in tatters. The next day, whispers began to ripple through the neighborhood like a breeze stirring still waters. News of Michael's encounter with the HOA police spread quickly, thanks in no small part to Greg and Dave themselves. Unable to keep their humiliation quiet, they recounted the bizarre incident to anyone who would listen, at the local coffee shop, at the gas station, even on social media. By lunchtime, nearly everyone on the street knew that Karen Hargrove had sent a pair of fake officers to Michael Reynolds' house, only for them to flee in embarrassment when he revealed his true identity. At first, most residents dismissed it, as another one of Karen's over-the-top stunts. "That sounds just like her," muttered Sarah Thompson, a retired schoolteacher who lived 3 doors down from Michael. Others chuckled nervously, unsure whether to be amused or concerned. But Karen, hearing fragments of the gossip while walking her dog, refused to believe the story. How could Michael possibly be the FBI chief? He seemed so ordinary. Surely, this was some elaborate ruse to make her look foolish. Determined to prove herself right, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. She called the local police department, demanding an investigation into Michael's supposed impersonation of a federal agent. "It's outrageous," she exclaimed to the officer on the line. "He's claiming to be someone important just to avoid following basic rules." The officer listened patiently but couldn't hide his skepticism. "Ma'am, I'll pass this along to the appropriate authorities, but unless you have concrete evidence, there's not much we can do." Unsatisfied, Karen turned to the media. She contacted every local news station she could find, spinning a tale of corruption and deceit. "This man is a fraud," she declared during one particularly heated phone call. "He's using his position to bully honest citizens like me." Meanwhile, Michael remained blissfully unaware of Karen's escalating crusade against him. Life went on as usual in his household. His kids argued over video games, his wife baked cookies, and he spent evenings tinkering with his mailbox, finally deciding to adjust its alignment just to humor the situation. If anything, he found the whole ordeal amusing. Who wouldn't? A grown woman hiring fake cops over a mailbox dispute. It was almost too absurd to believe. But as the days passed, Michael began to notice subtle changes in the atmosphere around him. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now greeted him warmly. Strangers waved enthusiastically from across the street. Even Mr. Jenkins, the grumpy old man who never left his porch, tipped his hat in acknowledgement. It was clear that word of his identity had reached far beyond Greg and Dave's loose lips. Curiosity eventually got the better of Michael. One evening after dinner, he sat down at his computer and started digging deeper into the so-called HOA, police. What he discovered shocked him. Greg and Dave weren't just random freelancers. They were part of a larger network of unlicensed security firms preying on unsuspecting homeowners across multiple states. These companies masqueraded as legitimate law enforcement agencies, exploiting people's fear of authority to extort money or enforce trivial rules. Worse still, many of these firms operated under the radar, evading scrutiny from actual law enforcement. As Michael scrolled through page after page of reports and complaints, a troubling pattern emerged. Several victims described being threatened with arrest for minor infractions, everything from parking violations to noisy parties. In each case, the perpetrators wore uniforms, carried badges, and spoke with enough confidence to fool even the savviest individuals. And behind many of these operations lurked figures like Karen, self-appointed enforcers willing to pay top dollar to silence dissent. Something about the scheme didn't sit right with Michael. As a seasoned investigator, he recognized the signs of organized fraud. The more he read, the angrier he became, not just because of what happened to him, but because innocent people were being manipulated and intimidated. This wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. It was about justice. By the time he closed his laptop, Michael had made up his mind. He couldn't let this go unchecked. With decades of experience rooting out criminals, he knew exactly how to dismantle the operation piece by piece. All he needed was a plan, and maybe a little help from his colleagues back at the FBI. Armed with newfound determination, Michael wasted no time getting to work. Early the next morning, he placed a discreet call to an old friend at the bureau, requesting access to resources that could help expose the scam. Within hours, files poured in, background checks on Greg and Dave, financial records linking them to similar cases nationwide, and even surveillance footage showing their interactions with other victims. Each document added another layer to the puzzle, painting a clearer picture of the network's inner workings. But Michael wasn't content to rely solely on data. To truly understand the scope of the problem, he needed first-hand insight. So, he devised a clever strategy: undercover agents posing as new residents moving into the neighborhood. Their mission? gain Karen's trust, and gather evidence of her involvement in orchestrating the fake arrests. The plan unfolded seamlessly. Two agents, dressed in casual clothes and driving a nondescript van, arrived on the street under the guise of a young couple eager to settle into suburban life. They introduced themselves to Karen, playing up their excitement about joining such a close-knit community. Flattered by the attention, Karen immediately launched into her usual spiel about HOA regulations, emphasizing the importance of compliance. Over the course of several weeks, the agents ingratiated themselves with Karen attending neighborhood meetings and feigning interest in her endless tirades. Slowly but surely, she began to confide in them, revealing details about her dealings with Greg and Dave. She even boasted about her role in intimidating neighbors into submission. "Sometimes you have to take charge," she told them proudly. "People need to know there are consequences for breaking the rules." Unbeknownst to Karen, every conversation was recorded. Every boast, every admission, every incriminating detail was meticulously documented. Meanwhile, Michael worked tirelessly behind the scenes, coordinating with local authorities to build a solid case against the fraudulent operation. By the time everything fell into place, they had enough evidence to bring down not only Karen but also the entire network of fake HOA police. When the sting operation finally came to fruition, it happened swiftly and decisively. On a crisp Saturday morning, a team of real FBI agents descended upon Karen's house, accompanied by reporters invited to witness the arrest. Startled and disheveled, Karen answered the door only to be met with flashing cameras and stern-faced officers. Handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists as agents read her rights aloud. "What is this?" Karen sputtered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You can't do this. I'm protecting the community." "Actually, ma'am," one of the agents replied calmly, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and impersonation of law enforcement officials." As Karen was led away, neighbors gathered on their porches watching in stunned silence. Some clapped quietly. Others exchanged knowing glances. For years they'd lived in fear of Karen's wrath, tiptoeing around her demands and swallowing their resentment. Now finally they could breathe freely. Greg and Dave were arrested shortly afterward, along with several other key players in the scam. Investigators uncovered a treasure trove of documents detailing their activities, including contracts signed by unwitting clients and bank statements showing hefty payouts from people like Karen. The operation stretched farther than anyone had imagined, affecting hundreds of communities nationwide. For Michael, the victory was bittersweet. While he took no pleasure in seeing Karen humiliated, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing he'd helped protect others from falling victim to similar schemes. More importantly, he reminded himself why he'd chosen a career in law enforcement: to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. With the dust settled and peace restored to the neighborhood, Michael returned to his daily routine. His mailbox stood proudly aligned with the curb, a testament to both his patience and his resolve. And though he never sought recognition for his actions, the grateful smiles of his neighbors said everything words couldn't. Karen's arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, but it wasn't just her neighbors who were stunned. It was the entire community. The story of how a suburban HOA tyrant had orchestrated fake arrests using unlicensed police spread like wildfire. Local news stations couldn't get enough of it. Reporters camped outside Karen's house, interviewing anyone willing to speak about the woman who once ruled with an iron fist. Her name became synonymous with petty tyranny and hubris. For Karen, the days following her arrest were a blur of confusion, anger, and denial. Sitting in a cold interrogation room at the police station, she struggled to process what had happened. How could this have gone so wrong? In her mind, she hadn't done anything illegal. She'd simply been enforcing rules designed to keep the neighborhood pristine. But as investigators laid out the evidence against her, reality began to sink in. The contracts she'd signed with Greg and Dave, the payments she'd made for their services, the threats she'd issued under the guise of authority, all of it painted a damning picture. When the charges were formally announced, they hit hard: conspiracy to commit fraud, impersonation of law enforcement officials, and extortion. Each charge carried significant penalties, and together, They ensured that Karen would face serious consequences for her actions. What hurt most, however, wasn't the legal trouble. It was the public humiliation. For years, Karen had prided herself on being the ultimate enforcer of order and decorum. Now she was nothing more than a cautionary tale. As word of her arrest spread beyond the neighborhood, Karen's reputation crumbled. Social media lit up with memes mocking her obsession with mailboxes and lawn height regulations. Late-night comedians cracked jokes about HOA Karen, turning her into a punchline. Even worse, former friends turned their backs on her. At the arraignment hearing, not a single person showed up to support her, not even her husband, who quietly filed for divorce shortly after her arrest. Meanwhile, Michael remained focused on ensuring justice was served, not just for himself, but for all the victims caught up in the scam. Working alongside federal agents, he helped dismantle the larger network of fake HOA police operating across multiple states. Dozens of individuals were arrested, including several high-profile figures who had hired these fraudulent enforcers to intimidate neighbors or competitors. The operation revealed a disturbing trend of abuse of power, where people like Karen exploited loopholes to wield control over others. But Michael didn't stop there. Recognizing the need for greater awareness, he partnered with local authorities to launch a public education campaign about scams involving fake law enforcement. Flyers were distributed, seminars were held, and TV spots aired, warning homeowners about imposters posing as officials. The message was clear: if someone claims to be enforcing laws or issuing citations, always verify their credentials and don't hesitate to report suspicious activity. Back in the neighborhood, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible after such a dramatic upheaval. Without Karen breathing down their necks, residents felt freer than ever before. Lawns grew slightly longer, holiday decorations stayed up a little longer, and mailboxes occasionally leaned sideways without fear of reprisal. It was as though a collective weight had been lifted. Still, the aftermath of Karen's downfall left lingering questions. Would someone else step into her shoes and try to impose similar restrictions? Or would the community embrace a more relaxed approach to living together? For now, people seemed content to let things ride, enjoying the rare sense of peace that came with knowing they wouldn't wake up to find Karen prowling their driveways with a clipboard. Through it all, Michael remained humble. He never sought credit for exposing the scam or bringing Karen to justice. Instead, he focused on rebuilding trust within the neighborhood, attending block parties, and offering friendly advice when asked. His quiet leadership inspired others to take ownership of their community, fostering a spirit of cooperation rather than conflict. Karen's story became a lesson for everyone involved, not just about the dangers of abusing power, but also about the importance of standing up to bullies, no matter how small their grievances might seem. And though few people spoke of her directly, her absence loomed large, serving as a reminder of what happens when ego overrides empathy. With Karen behind bars and the fake HOA police disbanded, the neighborhood entered a new era, one defined by unity, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to moving forward. The transformation was remarkable. Where once tension and resentment had simmered beneath the surface, laughter and camaraderie now flowed freely. Neighbors greeted each other warmly, kids played together in the streets, and weekend barbecues became weekly traditions rather than occasional luxuries. Michael played a key role in this shift, though he did so quietly and without fanfare. After the dust settled from Karen's arrest, he organized a community meeting to discuss ways to prevent similar conflicts in the future. The turnout was impressive, with nearly every household represented. People sat in folding chairs arranged on someone's driveway, sipping lemonade and exchanging ideas about how to create a more inclusive environment. "We've all seen what happens when one person tries to dominate the conversation," Michael said during the meeting, his tone calm but firm. "It divides us. Let's make sure we're working together, not against each other." His words resonated deeply with those in attendance. Together, they drafted a revised set of guidelines for the neighborhood, emphasizing flexibility and communication over rigid enforcement. Gone were the nitpicky rules about mailbox alignment and garden gnomes. Instead, the focus shifted to maintaining safety, cleanliness, and harmony. Most importantly, decisions would now be made democratically, with input from everyone affected. The changes brought immediate results. Flowers bloomed brighter, fences needed fewer repairs, and disputes dwindled to almost nothing. When disagreements did arise, they were resolved through open dialogue rather than threats or intimidation. It was as though the neighborhood had rediscovered its soul, shedding the toxic influence of Karen's reign and embracing a healthier way of coexisting. Of course, not everyone forgot about Karen entirely. Some residents joked about her during late-night gatherings, recounting tales of her infamous tirades with equal parts amusement and relief. Others expressed gratitude for the lessons her downfall had taught them. If it weren't for her, one neighbor remarked during a barbecue, we might still be living in fear. For Michael, the experience reinforced why he'd chosen a career in law enforcement. Though his job often involved tackling complex, high-stakes cases, moments like this reminded him of the simpler joys of helping ordinary people navigate extraordinary challenges. He found fulfillment in knowing that he'd made a tangible difference, not just as the FBI chief, but as a neighbor and friend. As summer turned to fall, the community celebrated its newfound freedom with a massive block party. Tables groaned under the weight of homemade dishes, music drifted through the crisp air, and children darted between yards, chasing fireflies as dusk fell. At the center of it all stood Michael, surrounded by smiling faces and heartfelt thanks. Yet despite the accolades, he remained modest, deflecting praise with a simple shrug. I didn't do anything special, he told anyone who complimented him. We fixed this together. And in many ways, he was right. While Michael had, undoubtedly, played a pivotal role in exposing the scam and restoring balance to the neighborhood, the real victory belonged to the community itself. They had come together, learned from their mistakes, and emerged stronger than ever. On the final day of the block party, as the sun dipped below the horizon and stars began to twinkle overhead, Michael took a moment to reflect. Standing on his porch, he glanced at his mailbox, the same one that had sparked the entire ordeal. It stood perfectly aligned with the curb, freshly painted and gleaming in the moonlight. Smiling to himself, Michael realized something important. Sometimes the smallest details could lead to the biggest changes. And in this case, a simple mailbox had become a symbol of resilience, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Life in the neighborhood had transformed completely, and as weeks turned into months, the scars left by Karen's reign began to fade. What remained was a community stronger than ever before, a place where people genuinely cared about one another and worked together to solve problems. The streets buzzed with activity again. Kids played basketball in driveways, families hosted potluck dinners, and neighbors exchanged tips on gardening and home repairs. It was almost hard to believe that this same neighborhood had once been ruled by fear. Michael, too, settled back into his routine, balancing his role as a devoted family man with occasional trips to Washington, D.C. for FBI meetings. Though he'd initially planned to take an extended leave of absence, the events surrounding Karen's arrest reminded him how much he loved his job. Helping communities like his own navigate crises gave him a sense of purpose that no amount of downtime could replace. Still, he cherished the quiet moments at home, watching his kids laugh and play or sitting on the porch with his wife as the sun set. The mailbox, the very object that had sparked the entire saga, became something of a local legend. Neighbors often joked about it, teasing Michael good-naturedly whenever they passed by. "Hey, Chief," one would call out, "how's your infamous mailbox holding up?" Michael always laughed along, happy to indulge their humor. In truth, though he didn't mind the attention, that little box symbolized so much more than just a property line dispute. It represented resilience, teamwork, and the triumph of fairness over tyranny. One crisp autumn morning, Michael decided to give the mailbox a fresh coat of paint. Armed with brushes and a can of glossy white enamel, he worked methodically, smoothing out every scratch and blemish until it gleamed under the sunlight. As he stepped back to admire his handiwork, A neighbor named Lisa approached, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Thought you might need a break," she said with a smile, handing him one of the cups. "Thanks," Michael replied, taking a sip. Perfect timing. Lisa leaned against the fence, eyeing the freshly painted mailbox. "You know, I think this thing deserves its own plaque or something. Maybe we should put up a sign. Historic mailbox, site of the great HOA. Scandal," Michael chuckled. "Let's not get carried away." "I'm serious," Lisa insisted. "It's part of our history now. People will tell stories about this for years." And she was right. Already, newcomers to the neighborhood were greeted with tales of the mailbox wars and the woman who tried and failed to enforce her will through intimidation. These stories served as both entertainment and cautionary tales, reminding everyone of the importance of humility and cooperation. As winter approached, the community prepared for its annual holiday celebration, a tradition that had fallen by the wayside during Karen's tenure. This year, however, it was bigger and better than ever. Strings of lights adorned rooftops, wreaths hung proudly on doors, and inflatable snowmen bobbed gently in front yards. At the center of it all stood a towering Christmas tree in the cul-de-sac, decorated with ornaments donated by residents. On the night of the celebration, the street glowed with warmth and cheer. Families gathered around bonfires, roasting marshmallows and singing carols. Children darted between houses, clutching bags of candy and small gifts. Even Michael joined in the festivities, helping organize games and activities for the kids. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt truly alive. Amidst the laughter and music, Michael found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. From the moment Karen marched up to his door with her clipboard to the day she was led away in handcuffs, the journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet through it all, he'd learned valuable lessons. Not just about standing up to bullies, but also about the strength of unity and the power of kindness. When the clock struck midnight, signaling the end of the celebration, Michael stood on his porch once more, gazing at the glittering lights strung across rooftops. His wife joined him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "You did good," she said softly, leaning her head against his arm. "We all did," he corrected her. "This wasn't just me. It was everyone pitching in." She nodded, smiling. "Still, I'm proud of you." Michael didn't respond, but he didn't need to. He knew what she meant. Together, they watched as the last guests trickled inside, leaving behind a quiet, peaceful street bathed in moonlight. In the days that followed, life returned to its usual rhythm. Kids went back to school, adults resumed their daily routines, and the holidays faded into memories. But the spirit of cooperation lingered, woven into the fabric of the neighborhood like threads in a tapestry. People continued to look out for one another, sharing tools, offering rides, and lending a helping hand whenever needed. For Michael, the experience reinforced his belief in the goodness of people. Despite Karen's attempts to divide them, the community had come together, proving that compassion and understanding could overcome even the most stubborn obstacles. And while he knew challenges would inevitably arise in the future, he felt confident that they would face them as a united front. One evening, as he sat on the porch reading a book, Michael glanced at the mailbox one last time. It stood tall and sturdy, a testament to perseverance and justice. He smiled to himself, knowing that sometimes the smallest things could spark the biggest changes. With a contented sigh, he closed his book and headed inside, ready to embrace whatever adventures lay ahead.